requires a central processor, a brain, a command center that receives information from the periphery, weighs options against stored memory, selects a course of action, and dispatches instructions back to the body. This is how intelligent systems work. This is how we think. This is how every mammal, every bird, every creature we typically associate with cognition and deliberate choice operates. One location, one mind, one self. Now imagine a different architecture entirely. Imagine a creature where only 1/3 of the nervous system resides in anything resembling a brain. The remaining 2/3 are distributed throughout 8 long, semi-autonomous appendages. Arms that can taste, feel, see light, arms that do not wait for instructions from above, arms that can detect a threat and begin responding before the central ganglion has finished processing that the threat exists. Now imagine that this creature, this distributed, decentralized, neurologically fragmented organism, is capable of one of the most cognitively complex behaviors observed in any invertebrate. It lies, not by hiding, not by going still, not by merging into the background the way a flounder or a stonefish dissolves into its substrate. It performs. It selects a character. It chooses a disguise. And it tailors that disguise to the specific animal it needs to deceive. This is the story of Thumoctopus mimicus, the mimic octopus, an organism that challenges everything we think we know about intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to understand another mind. The Banda Sea, off the coast of Sulawesi, Indonesia. The water is warm, between 26 and 29 degrees Celsius year-round. The light is brilliant, penetrating the shallow reef to depths of 15 to 20 meters in vivid, fractured columns of blue and gold. Visibility is extraordinary, and that visibility is precisely the problem. To live in this environment is to be permanently, inescapably seen. The shallow Indo-Pacific Reef is among the most species-dense ecosystems on the planet. Within a single square meter, dozens of species may compete for food, territory, or mates. Predators are not scarce. Mantis shrimp, with eyes capable of detecting polarized light and ultraviolet spectra invisible to humans, lurk beneath the sand. Groupers move in short, explosive bursts from coral outcroppings. Moray eels wait inside crevices, nearly motionless, for hours. Lionfish drift in slow, elegant, toxic patrols. And above all of them, from the surface, the light plays tricks, refracting movement into distorted shadows that can reveal the smallest creature making the smallest motion. In this environment, every physical attribute carries information: the shape of a fin, the color of a body segment, the movement pattern of a swimming creature. All of these signals are read, interpreted, and acted upon by predators at near instantaneous speed. To be seen incorrectly here is not an embarrassment. It is a death sentence. If you are a small, soft-bodied animal without armor, without venom, without speed, your survival hinges entirely on controlling what information you transmit. You cannot afford to be what you are. You must constantly be something else. The mimic octopus is a small animal. Adults rarely exceed 60 centimeters from the tip of one arm to the tip of the opposite arm. Their weight is negligible. They have no shell, no structural protection of any kind. Their skin, a thin, elastic membrane, is all that stands between their internal organs and the teeth, claws, and stinging cells of a dozen varieties of predator that would happily consume them. And yet, they thrive. Not despite this vulnerability, but because of what that vulnerability forced their lineage to develop over millions of years. This is an organism that evolution stripped down to its intellectual essentials. It gave up permanence. It gave up rigidity. And it gained something rarer, the capacity to become. To understand how the mimic octopus deceives, you must first understand what its body actually is. Most animals, when we speak of their physical appearance, are describing something fixed. A zebra has stripes, a poison dart frog is red, a peacock has iridescent feathers. These traits are structural, genetic expressions that develop during growth and remain largely static throughout the animal's life. They are descriptions. The skin of a cephalopod is not a description. It is a display, an active, real-time, software-driven output, rendered by an extraordinarily complex biological system. The first layer of this system is the chromatophore network. Chromatophores are pigment-containing cells, each one a tiny sac of color: yellow, orange, red, brown, or black, surrounded by a ring of radial muscle fibers. When those muscles contract, the sac stretches and expands, making the pigment visible at the surface of the skin. When the muscles relax, the sac compresses back to near invisibility. Each chromatophore is individually controlled, each one wired directly to the nervous system, each capable of activating and deactivating in under 200 milliseconds. Beneath the chromatophores sit the iridophores, specialized reflective cells that do not contain pigment but instead manipulate light itself. Through structural coloration, the same physical principle that makes a soap bubble iridescent. Iridophores can create shimmering blues, greens, and silvers that no pigment-based system could produce. These cells can also shift their reflective properties in response to neurological signals, adding dynamic shimmer and metallic sheen to the skin's output. And on the surface, above all of this, is a layer of muscular projections called papillae. These are three-dimensional. They can be raised or retracted, creating texture, spines, ridges, smooth expanses, rough granularity, across any part of the body in any configuration. A mimic octopus can make its skin look like sand, like coral, like the rough hide of a sea cucumber, or the smooth, undulating surface of a flatfish, by adjusting the height and pattern of its papillae in real time. Taken together, these three systems form something without a precise parallel in human engineering: a reconfigurable surface that controls color, reflectance, and three-dimensional texture simultaneously across the entire body in under a fifth of a second. No screen technology we possess operates this way. No material science has replicated this architecture. The mimic octopus is running a biological rendering engine, one that has been optimized by hundreds of millions of years of selection pressure. And it is doing so in real time, under threat, in water. But here is what makes all of this extraordinary. The rendering engine is not running on autopilot. It is not executing a pre-programmed sequence. It is being directed. Choices are being made. The question, the deeply uncomfortable question, is who or what is making them. The nervous system of Thaumaoctopus mimicus, like that of all octopuses, is unlike any vertebrate nervous system in its architecture. An octopus possesses approximately 500 million neurons, roughly comparable to a domestic dog, and orders of magnitude more than most invertebrates. But what is remarkable is not the count. It is the distribution. Only around 1/3 of these neurons are located in the central brain, the lobes surrounding the esophagus in the creature's mantle. The remaining 2/3 are distributed throughout the arms themselves, roughly 65 million neurons per arm, woven through the musculature in a dense, semi-autonomous network. Each arm can taste what it touches. Each arm can respond to tactile stimuli. Each arm can initiate and execute complex motor sequences, reaching into crevices, manipulating objects, withdrawing from threats, without first consulting the central brain. In laboratory settings, severed octopus arms continue to respond to stimuli and attempt coordinated grasping movements for up to an hour after separation. The arm is not merely a limb. It is, in a meaningful neurological sense, a semi-independent cognitive unit. What this means for a living, intact octopus is something researchers are still trying to fully articulate. The current understanding suggests a model of cognition that is, by vertebrate standards, alien. 8 semi-independent agents, the arms, capable of local processing and local decision-making, coordinated loosely by a central hub that sets priorities and modulates behavior, but which does not micromanage every movement. Think of it not as a general commanding troops, but as a conductor leading an orchestra where each musician can also improvise. The central brain may establish the theme. Move toward that prey item. Withdraw from that threat. Adopt this disguise. But the arms execute with considerable local autonomy. This raises a question that neuroscience is not yet equipped to fully answer. In a distributed system, where does a decision actually happen? When a mimic octopus encounters a predator and chooses, apparently deliberately, to reshape itself into an entirely different species, is that choice made in the central brain? Is it made in the arms that must coordinate their positions to execute the transformation? Is it made everywhere at once, emerging from the interaction of multiple semi-autonomous systems rather than from any single seat of consciousness? We do not know, and that uncertainty is itself profound. Because it means that what we are observing when we watch a mimic octopus perform, when we watch it think, may be a form of cognition that has no center. Intelligence without a seat. Decision-making without a decider. In 1998, marine biologists Jerry Allen and Mark Norman were conducting survey dives in the Strait of Lembah. In North Sulawesi, Indonesia, what they observed, and subsequently documented in a scientific paper published that same year, was, at the time, without precedent in cephalopod research. They had encountered an octopus unlike any previously described. Its body patterning was unusual, but more striking was its behavior. They watched it flatten its body and undulate its arms in a pattern unmistakably similar to the locomotion of a flatfish, specifically a flounder, moving across the sandy substrate in a slow, fluid wave. They watched it adopt other forms. They documented it. They named it Thaumactopus mimicus, from the Greek thauma, wonder, and the Latin mimicus, imitation. In the years since, researchers have documented multiple distinct mimicry behaviors in this species. Each behavior involves the octopus assuming not merely the coloration, but the three-dimensional posture, the movement pattern, and the overall silhouette of another organism. And, crucially, this is the detail that elevates the behavior beyond mere coincidence. The choice of which organism to mimic appears to be context-dependent. The flatfish, most commonly a flounder, is among the most frequently observed mimicry behaviors. The octopus pulls all 8 arms together and flattens its body into a single horizontal plane, then propels itself across the sand in a rhythmic wave motion, adopting the distinctive bilateral symmetry and undulating locomotion of a benthic flatfish. Flatfish are not particularly edible to many of the mimic octopus's predators. They are bony, difficult to catch, and not worthwhile prey. Adopting this form communicates, "Nothing to hunt here. Move along." The lionfish mimicry is more aggressive in its deterrent effect. The mimic octopus holds its body vertically in the water column and fans its arms outward and slightly downward, mimicking the elaborate venomous spine display of the lionfish. The color pattern shifts to the characteristic banded red and white of pteroi species. The movement is slow, deliberate, and conspicuous. The exact inverse of camouflage. This is not hiding. This is warning. The mimicked organism is saying, I am toxic. Do not approach. And the mimic octopus is saying that too, on borrowed authority. The sea snake mimicry is perhaps the most anatomically extreme. The octopus extends 2 arms in opposite directions and hides the remaining 6 beneath its body, or within a burrow, allowing only the extended pair to be visible. It then moves these 2 arms in the slow, lateral, undulating wave characteristic of banded sea snakes, which are highly venomous and widely recognized as dangerous by the reef's predatory community. The octopus's skin adopts the banded black and white coloration of the snake's body. These are not accidents. They are not reflexive, instinctive responses triggered automatically by the presence of a predator, the way a sea cucumber everts its respiratory organs or a pufferfish inflates. The form adopted appears to vary by context. Researchers observing the octopus in the presence of different predatory species have noted what appears to be selection, different forms deployed against different threats. In documented observations, the sea snake mimicry appeared more frequently when the threatening predator was a damselfish, a species that is known to be preyed upon by sea snakes in their natural range. Against other predators, flatfish or lionfish mimicry was more common. If these observations hold under rigorous experimental scrutiny, and that scrutiny is ongoing, then what we are looking at is not instinctive response. It is threat assessment, followed by targeted deception. The octopus is not simply performing. It is performing for an audience, and it is choosing the performance based on who is watching. That is not camouflage. That is strategy. In the long history of animal defense strategies, hard structures are overwhelmingly popular. Shells, carapaces, scales, exoskeletons, bone. The fossil record is dense with armored lineages. The evolutionary logic is simple. If you can build a barrier that resists penetration, you reduce the risk of predation without requiring any active response on your part. Armor works while you sleep. Cephalopods, the lineage that includes octopuses, squid, nautiluses, and cuttlefish, began with shells. The nautilus retains one today, a beautiful chambered structure of calcium carbonate that has persisted virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. The nautilus is, in a sense, the conservative cephalopod. It kept the armor, it kept the simplicity, and it has survived. But the lineage that gave rise to octopuses made a different bargain. Over evolutionary time, the internal shell was reduced, then lost entirely. What remained was soft tissue, muscular, elastic, infinitely reconfigurable, but utterly unprotected. This was not a compromise. It was a catastrophic vulnerability, traded against an extraordinary capability. Without a shell constraining its body shape, an octopus can squeeze through any opening larger than its beak, the only truly rigid structure it retains. Without rigid appendages, its arms can maneuver in 3 dimensions with a dexterity that no jointed limb can match. Without the metabolic cost of maintaining calcified structures, the organism's energy budget could be reallocated. And evolution, over millions of years of selection in a predator-dense environment, invested that energy budget into neural tissue. The mimic octopus represents the furthest extension of this trajectory. Soft, unprotected, and slow. It survives not through physical defense, but through cognitive performance. Its entire survival strategy is behavioral. Its immune system, in the ecological sense, is its ability to think faster and more creatively than the things that want to eat it. This is an organism that evolution bet everything on intelligence, and for now, that bet is paying off. Here we arrive at the question that makes researchers hesitate, that makes philosophers pay attention, that makes the mimic octopus something more than a biological curiosity. Theory of mind is the cognitive capacity to attribute mental states to other individuals, to understand that another being has beliefs, desires, and knowledge that differ from your own. It is considered, in developmental psychology, a critical milestone in human cognition. Children typically develop a robust theory of mind around age 4. It has been identified with varying degrees of confidence in great apes, corvids, dolphins, and elephants. It is considered foundational to complex social behavior, empathy, and strategic deception. Deception, in its full cognitive sense, requires theory of mind. To deceive another creature, you must understand, at some level, that the other creature has a model of the world in its mind, a model you can manipulate by feeding it false information. Deception is not error. Deception is the intentional construction of a false belief in another mind. When a mimic octopus confronts a damselfish and extends 2 arms in the banded pattern of a sea snake, what is it doing, cognitively? The simple interpretation: it is executing a hardwired behavioral program, a neural circuit activated by a specific sensory input, the presence of a damselfish, that triggers the sea snake display. In this interpretation, there is no understanding involved. The octopus does not know it is lying. It is a very sophisticated reflex. The more unsettling interpretation: the octopus has, through learning or through some more primitive analog of modeling, a representation of the damselfish's perceptual world. It knows, in some functional sense of that word, that the damselfish is afraid of sea snakes. It knows that adopting the sea snake's appearance will activate fear in the damselfish, and it performs accordingly. We cannot currently distinguish between these interpretations. The behavioral evidence is suggestive, but not conclusive. The neuroscience does not yet provide the tools to read the intention, if any, behind the performance. But consider what the behavior would require, at minimum, for the context-specific selection of mimicry targets to be real. The octopus would need to encode and store information about multiple other species, not just their appearance, but the relationship between those species and the predators the octopus encounters. It would need to match a perceived predator to a category, select the corresponding mimicry behavior from that match, and execute a full-body transformation. That is not a simple reflex chain. That is classification, retrieval, and decision-making. Whether there is something it is like to be a mimic octopus, whether there is any interior experience, any subjective awareness, we cannot know. The hard problem of consciousness resists resolution even for creatures far more neurologically similar to us than this one. But the behavioral evidence forces us to ask the question, and the question itself changes how we think about minds. Can something lie without knowing that it lies? Possibly yes, in the purely mechanical sense. But can something choose which lie to tell, to which audience, in which moment, and do this consistently, accurately, and apparently adaptively, without any form of representation of the social world it is navigating? That seems harder to believe. The mimic octopus was unknown to science until 1998. That is not ancient history. That is within living memory of most of the researchers currently studying it. We have been aware of this organism's existence for less than 3 decades. In those 3 decades, direct observational data has accumulated slowly. The mimic octopus is not easily kept in captivity. Its behavioral repertoire in controlled tank settings is impoverished compared to what is observed in the wild, a strong indicator that the complexity of its natural behavior is context-dependent, triggered by the real stakes and real diversity of its native reef environment. You cannot study a liar by putting it in a room with no one to lie to. Wild observation is difficult for different reasons. The animals are not large. They are, when not actively mimicking, cryptic, blending into sandy substrates with a sufficiency that makes them genuinely easy to overlook. The reef environments they inhabit are not easily accessible to researchers for extended periods, and the behaviors themselves, the mimicry events, are typically brief, lasting seconds to minutes before the octopus retreats into a burrow or moves to a new location. What we have, as a result, is a fragmentary observational record. We have documented a handful of mimicry forms with reasonable confidence. We have anecdotal evidence and some preliminary systematic observations suggesting context-specific selection of those forms. We have an understanding of the neurological architecture, the distributed nervous system, the semi-autonomous arms that makes the behavior physically possible. We have hypotheses about the cognitive mechanisms that might underlie it. What we do not have is a complete ethogram, a comprehensive catalog of the full range of the species' behavioral repertoire. We do not know how many distinct mimicry forms they are capable of. Initial reports suggested up to 15, but subsequent analysis has narrowed the confidently documented forms to a smaller number, with other observed behaviors remaining ambiguous in their classification. We do not know the ontogeny of the behavior, whether juveniles are born with the capacity or develop it through learning and practice. We do not know the precise sensory mechanism by which the octopus identifies the species it mimics or the species of the predator it is responding to. We do not know, in any deep sense, what is happening inside its distributed mind. In this respect, the mimic octopus is representative of a broader situation in cephalopod neuroscience and cognitive biology. We have enough data to know that something remarkable is occurring, and not nearly enough data to characterize it fully. The organism is ahead of our understanding of it. We began with a paradox. Most intelligent systems have a centralized brain. One location, one mind, one self. The architecture of cognition, as we understand it, from neurons to decisions, follows this principle so consistently that we have come to treat it as a law. Thaumaktopus mimicus does not follow this law. Its cognition, whatever it is, however it works, emerges from a distributed system in which no single location holds the whole. Its arms think. Its skin thinks. The decision to become a sea snake or a lionfish or a flatfish arises from a network rather than a node. And the result of that distributed, decentralized, architecturally alien process is behavior that looks, from the outside, like intention, like understanding, like deception. The lineage that gave rise to this organism diverged from the lineage that gave rise to vertebrates, and ultimately, to us, over 500 million years ago. That is not a gap. That is an abyss. On one side of that abyss, one experiment in nervous system evolution was conducted. Centralization, specialization, the encephalization of cognition into a protected, dedicated organ at the head of a bilaterally symmetrical body. On the other side, a different experiment. Distribution, parallelism, the spreading of neural function through a soft and boneless architecture with no fixed form. Both experiments produced behavior. Both produced learning, problem-solving, memory. Both produced what looks, from a behavioral standpoint, like intelligence. But they got there by entirely different routes, through entirely different structures, subject to entirely different constraints. What the mimic octopus demonstrates, quietly, in the warm, shallow water of the Banda Sea, in the brief moment before it vanishes into its burrow, is that intelligence is not a singular thing. It is not a feature that evolution discovered once and installed in one design. It is a functional outcome, a collection of capacities that can emerge from radically different physical substrates, radically different organizational architectures, radically different relationships between the creature and its environment. We tend to think of consciousness, of self-awareness, of mind, as things that have a specific shape. Because the only minds we have ever fully inhabited, the only minds we can access from the inside, are human minds. They are centralized. They are continuous. They feel singular. We have projected that shape onto our understanding of what mind can be. But the mimic octopus suggests a different possibility. It suggests that the space of possible minds, the space of configurations that produce cognition, that produce deception, that produce something functionally indistinguishable from intention, may be far larger than we have imagined. That consciousness might not require a center. That intelligence might not require continuity. That a self, in some meaningful sense, might be assembled from parts that each carry fragments of it. We do not know whether the mimic octopus has an experience. We do not know whether there is something it is like, subjectively, to be a distributed system that chooses to become a sea snake. But we know this. Something in that distributed system evaluates, selects, and performs. Something assesses a threat and responds with a targeted, contextually appropriate lie. Something chooses the right mask for the right audience. And whatever that something is, whatever we call it, however we classify it, however we eventually come to understand it, it is not nothing. On this planet, intelligence did not evolve once. It evolved differently.